Hey guys, Chris here. So in this lesson today, we're going to be jumping into a deep dive into funnel testing, optimization, and advanced scaling tactics. So we'll just jump straight in here. So testing is by far the most important aspect of this business because each split test you do is going to get you one step closer to a winning campaign, right? And when you're testing, you want to think in terms of structures. So plan out your split tests. That is like the biggest key I can give you. Pre-planning and mapping out what you're going to test is going to be a game changer. And I'll give you some examples in the next slide of exactly how to do that. So the other really important thing to know when testing is you need to be using the scientific method, which basically summarized means only test one variation at a time. So split testing one variation and element allows you to accurately see what the test's outcome is in terms of stats and sales. So down here below, we have an example of a split test here. So the only variation we're changing here is the ad. So we've got ad 1 and ad 2. They're both to the exact same audience, right? So only one variation is being tested here, which is the ad. So let's say they've both spent around $10. Ad 1 is getting a 1.5% CTR and ad 2 is getting a 4.5% CTR. So obviously out of these, we can see that ad 2 is performing the best. So what we then can do is then we can split test ad 2 against different audiences, right? So only one variation here is being tested, audiences. So ad 2, audience 1, audience 2. So we can see audience 1 and ad 2 have spent $40 and made 2 sales, where audience 2 and ad 2 has spent $40 and made 0 sales. So you can see here, we found the winning ad, and then we're split testing audiences and we found the winning audience. So let's say we tested audience 1 with ad 1 and audience 2 with ad 2. Since there's not one variation being tested, we're not sure if the audience is making the sales or the ad's making the sales. So that's why it's really important to only test one variation at a time. So this is another example of what you do once you find like which variation is performing the best. So you can see here, this is the original split test, audience 1, ad 2. Ad 2 has got the highest CTR. So then what we can do is we can split test ad 2 against different audiences. So you can see here, we've now got audience 1, audience 2, audience 3, all with ad 2. So the only variation here being tested are the audiences. So you can see here, they've all spent $40. Audience 1 made 0 sales, audience 2 made 2 sales, audience 3 made 1 sales. So obviously we found that audience 2 and audience 3 are making sales. So, that's exactly how it's done. So we found the two audiences that are performing with the ad that's performing. So when it comes to testing, you can test standalone ads, or you can also use the tool Facebook provides you, which is called a dynamic creative. So a dynamic creative is a single ad with multiple creatives in it. So a DC allows us to have the algorithm automatically test a range of assets within a single ad and spread the ad set's budget across the different creatives. So this means you can have multiple ad copies, multiple headlines, multiple videos and images within a single ad. So since the budget is spread thin across all the combos of the creative, I recommend having 2 to 3 images or videos, 2 ad copies and 2 headlines per dynamic creative. You can always test more as well, of course, like everything, it comes down to testing, but you want to make sure that your budget isn't spread too thin, because if you had like 100 different combinations with only a $20 budget, then there's not going to be really accurate like data to actually see what's working. So when it comes to different campaign structures and testing methods, you have campaign budget optimizations, which are CBOs. So what CBOs are is it's basically you're setting a daily budget at the campaign level, and then the algorithm automatically delivers the budget across the ad sets itself, and it's based on stats. So theoretically, the algorithm chooses the best ad sets to spend the budget towards, which works great sometimes, but it is important to keep watch on the spends. And it's totally normal for the ad sets and the assets to not get the same spend across all of them. So for example, let's say we launch this CBO at $100 a day. After the first day, we look at the spends, right? We can see ad set 1 has spent 30, ad set 2 has spent 15, ad set 3 has spent 50, ad set 4 has spent 5. So This is just the algorithm distributing the budget across all ad sets in different amounts to what it sees will be the most beneficial. So an example structure that you could run with a CBO, we want to keep in mind that we're testing one variation at a time, but you can mix these in, right? So you can see this top two here. We've got DC1. We've got DC1 running against audience 1, audience 2, and then the bottom two, we've got audience 1 and 2 running to DC2. So there's a total of 4 variations being tested here. Dynamic Creative 1, Dynamic Creative 2, and they're both being tested against audience 1 and audience 2. So we want to make sure it's done in the scientific method so that we're testing each variable against each other, right? And then the budget will be automatically spread across, each ad set in differing amounts based on the algorithm. So the next method of campaign structure is actually ad set budgets, also known as ABOs. So in ABOs, you're manually inputting the daily budget for each ad set. This allows you to have the same spends across each ad set so that the data can be accurately compared from ad set to ad set. So this gives you more control and it's easier to test and run stuff on smaller budgets. So you can see here in this campaign, we've got 4 ad sets and all of them are set to $20 a day. So when it comes to CBOs and ABOs, they're both very powerful. For CBOs, having the algorithm automatically spread budgets based on performance can be very beneficial, but also having ABOs allows you to control the spend across every ad set evenly and then turn them off when you can see how they're performing, right? So feel free to test both methods and find out what you prefer, because once again, these are 2 different options you can play with and then test with once you're running your ads. So now let's jump into how to analyze your split tests, right? So this is an example campaign here that we had prior. So you can see whether this is ABO or CBO, it doesn't really matter too much as long as the spends are all pretty consistent across them. So you can see here DC1 being tested against audience 1 and 2, DC2 being tested against audience 1 and 2, right? So we can see that this one here made 2 sales, this one here made 4 sales, this one here made 0, this one here made 2. So out of all of these, audience 1 made a total of 2 sales across both dynamic creatives. Audience 2 made 6 sales across both dynamic creatives. And then on top of that, DC1 made 6 sales in total and DC2 made 2 sales in total. So from these stats, we can accurately see that audience 2 is 100% the winner and then DC1 is the winner, and both together are the top performer. Right, so that should be very clear once you've done a split test like this. So in example, that case, right, this one here is obviously performing the best. So we could go ahead and then scale that out, and then we'll cover the different methods of scaling. But first, it's important to know when to trim the fat, because when you're testing, you don't want to be spending too much money on stuff that isn't working, right? You want to conserve your budget and you want to do stuff accurately. So when it comes to testing, you can tell what your CTR is going to be on your ads in around $10 spend. So when you're testing, always monitor your testing variables and compare and contrast them with all the other ads you're running, right? So if DC1 is getting a 1% CTR, but DC2 is getting a 4% CTR, then you can already tell that you can turn DC1 off and focus on the other DC. So for turning ads off, I personally recommend, regardless of the stats, right? So if the percentage of the click-through rate is really low to begin with compared to your others, you can turn them off quicker, right? But for ads that are getting good stats, like they're getting 4.5% CTR, getting heaps of clicks, all that good stuff, I recommend personally turning your ads off at around $50 to $70 spend, or you can turn them off at a spend of around 1 to 1.5 times the commission value. So basically this is just like, if you're running an ad, you're getting 5% CTR, but you're not, you've spent $70, $80 or even $150, you're not making any sales, and I'd recommend just turning that off, right? And also you want to compare and contrast your stats all the time, right? So if you're getting a cost per purchase of 50 and the other ad sets are getting a cost per purchase of 70, then you know what's not performing, and then you can obviously turn that off. So you're always trying to beat your own stats. You're always comparing your split tests to see what is performing the best so that you can focus on that in the future. So for trimming fat in CBOs, since the budget isn't spent equally across them, I wait until each ad set gets to a spend of say $50 to $70, or you can do the 1 to 1.5 times the commission value. So once an ad set has hit that threshold within a CBO and it's not performing, then I'll turn that off. And yes, if ad sets within a CBO are not performing, you can turn them off. And then this allows the budget to be focused on the ones that are performing well. And because this is the whole benefit of using a CBO, right? Because let's say you have 5 ad sets in there, 2 of them are performing well, 3 aren't, and you're spending $100 a day on those. You could turn the 3 that aren't performing off, and then that budget gets allocated to the ones that are performing well. And then the increase in budget will then obviously theoretically improve the performance of those ones that are working. So for ad set budgets, it's basically the same thing, but since they're all equally spending at the same level, you get an equal perspective on performance, right? So you don't have to wait till they all reach $50, which might be a couple days later, for example, in a CBO, because on ad set budgets, they will all hit the same spending threshold. Like they will all be spending the same every day. So now it's time to introduce the traffic veins, right? So this is a really big factor when it comes to Facebook, because Facebook's ads run on algorithms. So once you launch an ad set or a CBO, it then begins the algorithm. So you could run 2 of the exact same CBOs or 2 of the exact same ad sets, and one may perform super well and the other one absolutely bombs. This is because of the veins that they are in, right? And it's a factor that we need to pay attention to and utilize to our benefit. So think of the veins in the algorithm, like each ad has its own unique algorithm. So think of it like a drill, right? So each ad you launch is a unique drill getting sent into the ground. Both drills can be the exact same, digging in the exact same ground, so the exact same ad and the exact same audience, for example, yet one drill might find the golden traffic vein and the other one might not. So we want to, this is an unfortunate, like factor within Facebook ads, but it's really important to take grasp of this, because you might launch an ad and it's getting really good stats, but you're just not making sales. That could be an example of it being in a bad vein, right? So that's why we have the multiple testing and scaling methods to sort of tap the vein and find where those traffic sources are. So don't be too afraid of it, because we'll discuss the methods of actually utilizing it to our advantage in the next slide. So the 2 top scaling methods right now are horizontal scaling and vertical scaling, right? So horizontal scaling is a method of duplicating out an existing winning ad set or CBO multiple times in order to scale, right? So this increases the overall spend as well as tapping in for different veins. So this allows you to, for example, launch 4 times an ad set. You might get 3 winners and the other one might not perform. So you might turn that other one off based on performance, right? So for vertically scaling is increasing the budget on a single CBO or ad set from say $100 to $200. But when vertically scaling, it's important to note that big movements can potentially knock a budget out of its vein if it's performing well. So smaller movements of increases by 20 to 50% is recommended, as well as monitoring the performance for 2 or 3 days and then bump the budget again. However, you can also just double the budget, like from 100 to 200, and then you can see how it performs. I do this, but be cautious, because it sometimes throws it off or it sometimes works really well. So it's just another factor that you have to take into account when you're, bumping budgets up or duplicating, that you just want to test it out and you really want to monitor it. So the more you're in the Facebook Ads Manager, the more you're doing stuff, the more this is going to become sort of intuitive. And that's where we want you guys to be. We want your competence level on this to be as good as it can, so that when you're in there, you're doing the work, you're grinding, you're duplicating ads, you're scaling budgets, you can sort of feel what needs to be done, right? You might vertically scale, you might test, horizontal scaling first. And then once you have some horizontal ads that are performing well, you can start bumping the budgets up. So for example, duplicating is horizontal scaling, right? So this is an example structure of scaling with CBOs. So we can see here the first campaign we ran, audience 2, DC1 is performing the best. DC2, audience 2 is performing the best, right? So audience 2 is obviously the winner and DC1 is the winner, but both together are performing the best. So audience 2, DC1. So what we can do is we can take this out and we can duplicate it and horizontally scale it. So for example, we then have another campaign here. We'll have two of the exact same ads. So audience 2, DC1, audience 2, DC1. Having two ad sets within this campaign is once again allowing us to tap the vein, right? If we only had one ad set in here, that one ad set may not hit the vein and then it doesn't really perform. So if we have two in here, it gives us two chances of finding what performs. And let's say the top one doesn't really perform, but the second one does. That just goes to show that if you didn't have two in there, you might have got the one that didn't perform. And then the concept's the exact same, but with the campaigns, right? You duplicate the two campaigns out, and then you have 4 chances of them hitting. So once again, monitor the performance to see which one gets the vein, and then trim the fat as necessary. So this is an example on how to increase the budget and start vertically scaling, right? So let's say that campaign 3 is performing really well over the last 3 days, getting an average of 100% ROI. We can then bump its budget up to 150 and then monitor its performance. So when it comes to scaling methods, I just want to have like a discussion here with everyone. So when I first get an ad that is performing well, I always like to duplicate it first, right? Because this way I can double, triple the budget whilst running, and also allows me to tap into other veins of traffic, right? So firstly, this allows me to see if in fact the ad is a winner, as majority of the duplicates should make sales, as well as being able to find more profitable veins than even the original ad you launched. So once I have multiple, that's the first step. I always like to horizontally duplicate to begin with. Like 100%, I always horizontally duplicate to begin with. And then once I have multiple duplicates performing well at the same budget, I'll then start to increase the budget on a couple of them. So when increasing budgets, there's a notion that you can increase 20 to 30% of the budget daily. However, I personally like to increase the budget 50% and then monitor the performance. So you may find that increasing the budget on a winner can actually decrease its performance. And this is why I always 100% duplicate first. Because if I have like 5, 6 duplicates consistently performing, if I then bump a budget up on one and it decreases performance, I still have those other ad sets, other CBOs making me ROI to maintain consistency. So when you're running your ads, you'll have to tweak and play around with some different budget levels to find out what budgets work and tap into those higher spending campaigns. So for example, you might be launching ad sets at, let's say, $20 a day, right? You've found your winning, you've split tested different dynamic creatives, you've split tested different audiences, and you've found the combos that have matched. If you have 3 or 4 of them running and they're all performing pretty decently, and you start increasing the spend on a couple of them, and let's say you double the spend to like $40 and it's performing well, that's great. You can even duplicate on then further. So you can duplicate them at the actual higher spend. And then let's say you increase slowly and maybe you get some ad sets to like $200 and they might not perform, right? Whereas your $50, $20, $30 ad sets are performing. There might just be a case where that ad set at that spend doesn't really perform well, which can happen. So, that's why we duplicate. So you can turn those ones off that aren't performing, or you can drop the budgets back down, then monitor performance. And then, through your testing, ideally you want to tweak and keep playing around, keep testing higher budgets, and then you can eventually break into some highly profitable campaigns at, $500, even $1,000 a day. So that basically summarizes how to split test and how to analyze your data and sort of different methods you can use and different structures you can use. So I really hope that, the biggest thing that you want to take away from this is the fact that split testing is the most important thing, right? The more split tests you do, I know in these examples here, we split tested a couple audiences, a couple dynamic creatives, but in reality, you might have to launch this campaign times 5 with like a total of 5 different dynamic creatives, a total of 5 different audiences, right? Because the more stuff you're testing each day, the more stuff you're throwing out there, the more drills you're putting in the ground, the more chances there are of you finding that winning campaign and tapping into that vein and getting some really profitable campaigns. So I'll leave you guys to it. I wish you all the best of luck, and then, yeah, hopefully you'll crush it.